Welcome to the 2-Month Review, the weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter and 3%, in which we take one giant book, break it down bit by bit, talk about it, have fun. This season, we are doing 2666 by Roberto Bolaño, and today we'll be covering the first half of the third part, the part about fate, so up to page 300. I am Chad Post from Open Letter Books, and I'm joined as always by Katie Whittemore.
Hello.
And by Brian Wood.
Baseball's over. Yay. No more baseball.
The racist team beat the cheating team. I have to say, so baseball's over, which is what it is. I couldn't watch it because Fox is fucking awful. But the thing that I want to say about the World Series is that I believe that the most horrifying image I've seen in ages came out of the World Series, which is Melania and Donald Trump doing the tomahawk chop at Game 4 with maniacal looks on their face.
Oh my God.
It is the most unnerving photo. It is a haunted image that once you see, you will never forget, and it's seared into your memory in a way that's uncomfortable.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wait,
and
so who played in the World Series?
What's so funny about it is that there's two things. When Georgia changed their voting laws, when you were there, Brian, and MLB was like, fuck y'all, we're not going to have the All-Star game here in Atlanta. So they moved the All-Star game. Trump throws a fit, tells everyone baseball's dying, boycott baseball, baseball's awful, blah, 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 blah. Then he appears at Game 4 in Atlanta doing the tomahawk chop with Melania. And MLB immediately issues a statement saying, we didn't invite him. We didn't want him to come. We couldn't stop him. Like it wasn't our fault.
Wow.
Yeah. Even now.
So Melania and Trump are still appearing in public together. I thought that maybe when she didn't have to.
That's also shocking.
So wait, so who played in the World Series?
Houston Astros and Atlanta Braves.
Mm.
And Atlanta still, this was a good moment of like general criticism for having the name Braves, for doing the tomahawk chop, for all these things. And that's fun. And then the Astros, which you probably don't know, Katie, last time they won the World Series, it was found out that they cheated. They used like a trash can to signal what were coming. Amazingly, which I don't feel is cheating. I feel it's totally fine. I'm very.
That's how I cheated in college.
That's
okay. The final exams. Hey, if the answer is A, hit the trash can once. Quiet room.
If I didn't sort of sneak back a look at where the catcher's glove was and what the sign was, I would never have gotten a hit.
Oh my God.
Well, doesn't this kind of tie in perfectly to the first half of this section? We've got racism, we've got the South, we've got it's like
sports.
All of it.
A feeling of
all of it. Pork chops.
Yeah, pork chops, death all around. The dangers of money, the dangers of it's perfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everything leads back to Bolaño.
Everything leads back to Bolaño.
If you want it to.
That's right. There's enough in here where really that could be true.
Yeah, it's like the Ulysses. It's like a new Ulysses. I was thinking that as I was reading this section of like how expansive the web of connections are. It's like that particular type of writer, like Joyce, like the maximalist, Joyce and Pynchon and whomever else, where everything can connect, everything can be pulled in, everything's there.
Yeah,
I feel like he does a really good job of I guess if you really want to go down it, you can, but he paints just a thin enough veneer on it where it's like, I'll just leave it at that and you can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
It's definitely there. And then you become like this maniac that wants to like dig deeper and maybe it's there or it isn't. And that's kind of might be the game he's playing with you.
I totally agree. I've been thinking that too, Brian, like how much of this is just sort of like, tossed in there for his own enjoyment, knowing that like people are going to be annotating these books. And like, I always just think about the PhD dissertations and just how this is just like a grab bag of possibilities.
I'm going to make,
who knows like what it's doing in there, who knows.
I'm going to make fate eat a lamb kebab at the beginning of this. And because I've got lamb all right. Lamb within the works of Roberto Bolaño's 2666, and there's a 20-page paper on lamb.
Mm-hmm.
So the dissertation I found yesterday, actually down this rabbit hole, was one on ghosts. on Planio 2666 Ghost, and then Marane's the Plains. But the ironically, here is the thing I wrote down at the top of my notes, which I've written on a special handwritten letter from the Jehovah's Witnesses who are trying to save me. They're very concerned because they can't visit me in person, but they want to know if I think suffering will ever end.
Definitely
and I'm here to tell them that it won't.
No,
it won't.
Never.
But on the back, the first thing I wrote down is this section opens with dead women and the second Oscar. So we have again like these random connections. So it opens with Oscar Fate, although we don't know his name is that at the beginning. Goes by, what is his real name?
Quincy Williams.
Quincy Williams. His mom dies, her neighbor dies, and then we find out that his name is Oscar, and Oscar Amalfitano is who we just left. So you've got that. You could take that right there of the dead women and the name Oscar and do what you want with it. Exactly what you're saying, Brian.
Yeah.
You know, I was thinking about, I actually wrote down two. Interestingly, I didn't even connect the two Oscars. Like, I always forget that Amalfitano has a first name. But I was thinking about the way that both of these sections open.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's like a bit of a parallel where you have this like sort of really brief, very internal paragraph of the men like reflecting, right? So for Amalfitano, he's like, what am I doing in Santa Teresa? I don't know. Everything, he can't be any more eloquent than that. I don't know what I'm doing here. And then with Fate, it opens with, and I'm wondering about this, like, I wonder if this is like a little snapshot of the future, right? So it says, when did it all begin, he thought? When did I go under? A dark, vaguely familiar Aztec lake, the nightmare. How do I get away? How do I take control? And the questions kept coming. Was getting away what he really wanted? Did he really want to leave it all behind? And also, he thought, the pain doesn't matter anymore. And also, maybe it all began with my mother's death. And also, the pain doesn't matter as long as it doesn't get any worse, as long as it isn't unbearable. And also, fuck, it hurts. Fuck, it hurts. Pay it no mind, pay it no mind. And all around him, ghosts.
So many ghosts.
And it's like, so.
You're right. That is like a futuristic or future moment.
Yeah, like I'm wondering, like, is this him in Santa Teresa, like at the end of what we're going to see for his part? And then we go right back to the beginning. His real name, Quincy Williams, was 30 when his mother died.
Yeah.
And it's a totally different type of narration. Like this first part is like, you know, really internal, vague, sort of horrible, the nightmare, the Aztec lake, you know, like, which is, you know, for me, it's like, I'm thinking of like the, you know, lake of fire and again, hell and the ghosts and where did he go under, you know, the sinking. So I think that's a really interesting way of opening the section. And then it goes right to this, like really sort of realistic noir as well, sort of very like North American style of writing that we have for a long time, really, until he gets, I mean, all the time that he's in Detroit. And then it starts to sort of get a little bit like spooky again when he's at the diner in Arizona. So maybe we want to talk about the time in Detroit and sort of his setup. And then maybe look at like, well, what starts to happen to him? What starts to sort of unravel as the closer he gets to Santa Teresa?
Well, just that idea of like him being in hell or in this kind of terrible purgatory at that beginning part. I like that briefly after that, we go straight to the death and dealing with death. And someone asks him on page 233, he asked whether Quincy knew what church his mother belonged to. He asked whether he himself had any religious preferences. Quincy said his mother belonged to the Christian Church of Fallen Angels. Or no, maybe it had another name. He couldn't remember. When, you know, hell is fallen angels. It's Lucifer is the fallen one.
Well, and how about this though?
His real name is Church of Angels Redeemed.
Yeah. Like I was reading something interesting yesterday that was like, well, which is fate? Like, are we going to find out, like, is he a fallen angel or is he an angel redeemed? But this again brings us back to what we were talking about in, I think maybe the second episode or when we were talking about sort of the religiosity and the images of the apocalyptic. And so, we're still, in that realm, I think, especially with fate.
I want to go to wherever you wanted to go next, Katie, but
I have a thing to say about that. Yeah.
if we could circle back around about the guy that's in the lake in Michigan, in connection to this, I think it would be perfect at some point. But let's move on.
Let's do it.
Okay, so with the Detroit thing that you were saying, one of the things that struck me when I first read this section the other day was what you had talked about. I don't know if it was last week or before, Katie, of how, I think it's also in the interview that follows this with Natasha Wimmer, about how he represents certain prophets or like utopic thinkers as sort of absurd or as sort of like failed, like all the sort of revolutionary ideals, the utopias all fail. And in this, we have the Black Panthers represented through these two stand-ins for Huey Newton and however else I forget. And he is been in jail, is in Detroit. Fate is there to interview him, and basically this former Black Panther who tried to save the community, do things for the community, talks about how they're like helping out their community, blah 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 blah, is now famous because he cooks pork chops and is good at makes a cookbook that gets him back into the world and back into the public eye, which is also kind of ridiculous. So like his works as like a utopian, pro African American speaker turn into being a gatherer of recipes.
Yeah, I know.
I had to do a biography on Eldridge Cleaver one time, and he was a member, one of the founding members of the Black Panther Party, and someone saw me reading. I'm like, Eldridge Cleaver, why do I know that? I was like, I don't know. I was in the library, just minding my business. Oh, he's that guy that made pants that had the big, huge third leg where your dick is supposed to be. And like that was all I knew Eldridge Cleaver was for this like style of pant that he helped try to create in Northern California. It's like, yeah, well, there's that. He did other things too.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah, that's that guy. That's the pork chops. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's right. Very similar.
You always remember people for one thing. That's why you gotta die right. You have to not die self-asphyxiated with shit around your junk. Don't do it. You will never live that down. That will be who you are forever.
Oh my God.
Philanthropist also played Batman one time in a movie. Okay, that's what you get, is that one dumb Batman movie. All right, gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
No, you go on.
No, well, I was wondering, yeah, I mean, I think, and this is getting away from Brian's, we do need to go back to Bobby in the lake, but I think just in general, like this overlay of Detroit, like I read all of these, I read these, it's like these places that are supposed to be like the American dream or the multinational dream, right? And it's places where there's supposed to be progress and future and then and possibly utopia. So there's like a narrative, right, of like the American dream. There's a narrative of NAFTA and of sort of like international globalization. And then there's the counter narrative, which would be like the narrative that the Black Panthers are going to, highlight, or the narrative of, the Latin American writers in the 70s who are going to be pushing back against like, sort of right wing totalitarian histories. So you have like the narrative and the counter narrative, and then it's like the counter narrative sort of always fails in its utopic dreams, right? And so Detroit, is Santa Teresa going to be like the next Detroit, or is Santa Teresa, a contemporary, like multinational Detroit? I think that there's some linkage there.
Yeah, I was thinking of it as Detroit was like the city of the future when in the 20s and through the 50s is like going to be like the next big, everything. So one of the largest cities in the country in terms of space, but it obviously because of the industrialization and NAFTA and everything else, completely gutted now, completely destroyed, empty, run down. There are no fire departments in various places. There are 0 chain grocery stores in the entirety of Detroit. Like, this is a wasteland. And what you had talked about before really tied into this section of these spaces where capitalism takes hold, sucks out all the excess, sucks out all the possible wealth and money and everything and resources, and then just leaves it barren. So Detroit is at the barren point here, even though there's not a time, there's not a date placed on like when this section is. It does refer to like rap music, which has been around for a while, but it feels like, you know, that and like
it's the 90s.
Yeah, the 90s of Detroit, where it's pretty fucked up. It's pretty seriously fucked up. And Santa Teresa is seriously fucked up in terms of the femicide and the murders, of which I have something to tell you guys when we get to that.
But also abject poverty. I mean,
and abject poverty, but it's also at the beginning parts, because all of the factories and everything, people are still moving there for that. So it's at that point that it's about to be exploited. It's being exploited still, whereas Detroit is like the remnant. And this ties into the book that he gets about the slave traders, where the Elmira, the Castle of Elmira, which is a real place, where they did hold all the slave trade, is just this rundown, destroyed, like it's this, like it's still there. It's this castle. It's a UNESCO monument, but it was like the place of like these horrible, horrible things. And I found an article in which they're talking about, you go on tours and like people are like making jokes about it and don't take it seriously. It's like become commodified as a place to see, but it was one that was there and it's abandoned. Then once the slave trade part was taken out, it's abandoned, gone. And then there's a funny comment that I have to share. And then moves on to Detroit, moves on to Santa Teresa. So what you were talking about the other week with like capitalism sucking these things out and then moving on and leaving behind all these bodies.
Right. Yeah. What are you going to say the comment?
The comment I just posted was, Fate's story comes off a bit like Kafka's America's main protagonist, which is something that I brought up on the ensuing interview with Natasha Wimmer, which is strange. But I remember that comment coming up before. It's been a while since I read America, but there is something about it where it's like a little flat and like observational and it's not like really Detroit. Like it's not meant to be a realistic. Like he doesn't like spend any
worried about
making, reference Woodward Avenue maybe, and that's about it. And like there's not a lot of time spent on like making it feel like you're in Detroit the way that like a Iowa workshop writer would like, you know, labor over the details. And instead he's just sort of a cipher to like have that part of America come through him, in the way that Kafka's character sort of like takes the absurdity of America and exposes it by not being really America, by being this sort of like dark mirror reflection of.
Yeah.
Oh, and there's more comments saying, what are the Fate story and Kafka's America's main protagonist have in common? And the response is a ton of anxiety.
Yeah. Oh my God.
It's also true.
I really
part two where he was talking that he's in Detroit now, and the roots of the movement started in California, and they had to leave because California would kill you.
Yeah.
They put power structures in place to oppress. Something's rising up. We need to figure out a way to oppress this.
Mm-hmm.
And so, right, yeah. So then you have to leave, and you can't go back there.
Yeah,
I really like that he added that thread of it in there too.
Well, and again, like I'm going to move us a little bit to the diner, but I do want to make sure, Brian, that we go back to Bobby. Do you want to talk about Bobby now?
No, whatever.
I have a comment before you go to the diner too.
Okay. Let's do Bobby. Let's do when he's on the plane and he hears the people talking in front of him, right? That's the part.
Uh-huh.
I'm leaving it to you, Brian.
Yeah, this is like
you said you wanted to talk about
it's on page 240.
Got it.
Which is that a real place? Jackson Tree, Michigan. You're our Michigan expert.
I didn't double check, but Jackson, Michigan is a real place. But Jackson Tree is nothing I've ever heard of. But Jackson would make sense within this context, kind of.
Okay, all right.
But Jackson's not on the lake. It's just like a shitty rundown, like semi-flint that's like in between in the middle of the state.
But this actually, it kind of reminds me a little bit of when we get the story of the horse race, like the horse race, and it's that same kind of idea, right? The story within the story, and gosh, there's something here. I don't know exactly what it is, but boy, he's doing something good. I'll read just a little bit of it, but just to paraphrase, this guy's out on his little fishing dinghy boat, and it capsizes, and he's trying to prevent himself from drowning. And it's this terrifying. It's at night, so it's a black lake, much similar to the black lake we have at the beginning of this fate section, right? And he's losing his strength, and there's these weird like observations of how hard it is to. He tries to use his belt to tie himself to a log, and it's really hard to do that when you're drowning. You'd think you'd be able to do it, but it's really not that hard. The log's hard to manage. So halfway down, let's see here. It may sound easy, but in real life, it's hard to tie your own body to a floating log. So he gave up hope, turned his thoughts to his loved ones. Here they mention someone called Jig, which might have been the name of a friend or a dog or a pet he had. He clung to the branch as tightly as he could, and he saw a light in the sky. He thought it was a helicopter coming to find him, which was foolish, and he started to shout. But then it occurred to him that helicopters clattered, and the light he saw wasn't clattering. A few seconds later, he realized it was an airplane, a great big plane about to crash right where he was floating, clinging to that log. Suddenly, all his tiredness vanished. He saw the plane pass just overhead. It was in flames, maybe 1,000 feet from where he was. The plane plunged to the lake. He heard 2 explosions, possibly more. He felt the urge to get closer to the site of the disaster, and that's what he did, very slowly, because it was hard to steer the log. The plane had split in half, and only one part was still floating. Before Bobby got there, he watched it sink slowly down into the waters of the lake, which had gone dark again. A little while later, the rescue helicopters arrived, and all they found was him, and they were kind of upset because he wasn't a survivor of the plane. He got saved because he was by this terrible accident, but they were kind of begrudgingly saved him because he's like, no, I was just on a fishing boat. But that's how he's alive.
But and I think that again is like here. I mean, it could just be sort of an anecdote, right? That we find these anecdotes interspersed. But here, like we're talking about fate here as well. Like here's someone who's supposed to die, but for the crazy accident of a plane crash where no one else survives, and he's the only survivor that they find. And so, I think that this is really. We can talk about this sort of at the end as we see what happens to Fate as he gets to Santa Teresa. But the idea of like, in Spanish, calling him Oscar Fate is like a real sort of wink, right? In English, I don't know, it's just, it seems like so on the nose, maybe too on the nose, but we have to remember that he's not writing it originally in English. And so there would be a bit more like play there. But the idea that like, here's this person that it's completely, is it coincidence or is it fate that, so and the other guy, the sports writer dies, he gets sent to Santa Teresa as he
doesn't just die, he gets murdered.
Yeah, he gets murdered.
Right.
Women troubles.
And as he's moving closer and closer, he's randomly hearing about these murders. Like, oh, are you here to talk about Santa Teresa? It's not a very nice place. Well, what? Have you heard about the women? Oh, you're here about the women. And it's like, and he's being drawn closer and closer and closer to like that circle, that abyss.
And his magazine is Black Dawn.
The magazine is Black Dawn.
And even someone says, that's a fucked up name for a magazine.
No, that's really funny.
New York, these freaking New Yorkers, Black Dawn. How about sunsets? Jeez.
Oh, dear.
But here's the end of it, right? Lies.
Lies.
Yep. Right, said Fate, and he turned away and stared out the window at the clouds that looked like cathedrals, or maybe just little toy churches, abandoned in labyrinthine marble quarry 100 times bigger than the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
Also, the thing they're talking about right before they talk about Bobby is ghosts. More ghosts. So many ghosts.
Ghosts.
The thing that I was going to mention before you mentioned the diner is that it precedes that Fate starts complaining about his stomach. Yeah, on 243, Fate goes in and gets sick. He vomits. And this continues throughout this part of like his illness or whatever is going on with him. And the diner has a bit of that too, because that's where the woman gives him the special tea and everything, right?
Right.
Yeah. So he's like infected in some way, I think, or like that feels like that's been it's in there so many times. It has to be, even if it's just on the nose a little bit.
Well, I think he's grieving. So, this is a person who's whose mother died. We don't really get any sense of the emotion of that. But it keeps coming up. So there's a couple things. We hear about her death. It's this kind of strange thing where, like, coincidentally, right, or fatefully, her neighbor dies like the same day or the next day, and they were like best of friends.
Yep.
We see him, like, he's watching videos at her house, like he tidies things up, he takes out the trash, and then he's on his way. We don't hear that much more. Wait, Brian, are you muted, or am I not hearing you?
It reminds me a lot of The Stranger with Kimberly. Like, mom died, or maybe it was yesterday. I don't know. Whatever. I got to go to the funeral.
There's like this strange flatness, but then we see that, like, it keeps cropping up in the narration that randomly there'll be like this eruption of the mother in the text and in his thoughts. Like, he thought of his mother, or he, and that happens, when he's in Mexico too. So I don't see him like necessarily as like sick or infected with something, but this is a person who's like grappling with grief and not in a healthy way.
Interesting. I mean, that works too. I just think of like that he's entering into like this world that's like really disturbed and like almost like physically is starting to pick up on that deep disturbance. And I don't know. I don't remember what happens at the end of this section. It was just something that like came up a few times, and the diner scene was one of the ones where it's like, man, this is a lot of like,
he's unwell,
going into something that's like really an unwell place, in which there's like the one thing that comes up later that we don't have to get to, but it's like the difference between like a serial killer and a serial killing scenario or machine.
So that's close to what I want to talk about with the scene at the diner.
Okay.
So, so I'm on, for me, it's on page 265.
But basically, all the same.
So he's in the diner and he's like, we see he's talking about, are there two Indians? There's two guys with like the Camaro, right? Is that what it was? So, he's describing like the local color, right, of things that are going on, the Pinterest. And then he's listening to this strange conversation between this like young man who seems like an acolyte and this older white-haired guy who we don't know what they're talking about at first, but then we see that they're talking about a killer and someone that this white-haired man caught. And we learned that this guy's name is Kessler. We'll learn more about Kessler later. But the important thing for me here, which ties it in, Chad, to what you were saying, what we've been saying about Detroit, what we've been saying about the maquiladoras, what we've been saying about these black holes, these geographic spaces that sort of collapse upon themselves with the weight, right, of this late capitalism and all these sorts of themes. Then we start talking specifically about killing as related to these spaces. And Kessler's telling the story about the young guy says, we've gotten used to death. And Kessler says, it's always been that way, said the white-haired man, always. And then on the next page, he's talking about, in the 19th century, in the 1800s, people are using words, they're using literature, they're writing as a way to obscure death, right? And as a way to pass things like through this filter of words to sort of trim away the fear, right? And as we like go forward in time, and we could discuss what words do now and what are the limits of words. But this part that is so interesting is he gives a couple of examples, right? About, what does a child do when he's afraid? He closes his eyes. What does a child do when he's about to be raped and murdered? He closes his eyes, and he screams too, but first he closes his eyes. Words served that purpose, right? A way of closing the eyes. And then he gives the example of the plantation owners and also the Paris Commune. So we're talking about, hundreds and then thousands of deaths that are juxtaposed with like one or two stories of somebody who goes crazy and, slits the throat of his wife and kids, or, his wife and his mother, and how these stories, these individual stories, are splashed all over the news, while the other stories of hundreds of deaths or thousands of deaths don't get mentioned, or they're sort of like, there's a banality to them. And I love what he says here. He said, this is on page 267. I think, honestly, guys, I think that we're looking right now at a section that is key to the whole book.
This is what, I said we could spend like 4 full episodes just dissecting this one.
There's like a couple of paragraphs that we've seen. We saw the one earlier about the learned pharmacist and the idea of like the grappling with that something that we try to face, writers, so I think that we're like looking at this again, and he's talking about okay, so the ones killed in the commune weren't part of society. The dark-skinned people who died in the ship weren't part of society, whereas the woman killed in a French provincial capital and the murderer on horseback in Virginia were. What happened to them could be written, you might say. It was legible. That said, words back then were mostly used in the art of avoidance, not revelation. Maybe they revealed something all the same. I couldn't tell you. So this is where I think Bolaño is taking it from more of like a sociological exploration of what is happening with violence, what is happening on the border. And he's like, we're really before somebody who is grappling with what does literature, what do words, what does writing have to do with this? Can it express anything? Is it legible? Is this violence, this mass violence, even legible? What does it mean to write about it? And I think that's just so fascinating. I'm very anxious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of when I was reading this and like kind of flipping out about it, because it's both so pointed to like where everything's kind of going towards and where we've been in reference to that. It also like gives us this really like not transcendental but sort of moment of seeing like all of this is like, so there's so much violence and death, and we only get those little focuses on there's this abyss of like death. I want to tell you something that's crazy, that's related to the femicides, because I don't know if this is the right place to learn or not, but when I was going down one of the rabbit holes, I found this and this is just on Wikipedia. According to Molly Malloy, a professor at New Mexico State University, the situation in Juarez, the stand-in for that Santa Teresa is the stand-in for, is one of impunity regardless of gender. She states that female murder victims have never comprised more than 18% of the overall number of murder victims in Ciudad Juarez. And in the last 2 decades, that figure averages at less than 10%. That's less than in the United States, where about 20 to 25% of the people who are murdered in a given year are women, which I read that and freaked the fuck out, because it's such a thing here of like the femicide, the murders, the female murders, and it's just like everywhere. And there's so much more than that. Like you can on this, it's sort of like what relates to the Gabby Petito thing of like you focus on these one story and there's these thousands of other stories that are just as horrible or even worse, but they are sort of obfuscated by those focus. So what is the role of the author, of the writer, of Bolaño? Can he illuminate that grand, that there's a system that's fucking this all up and killing all kinds of people? And as a writer, your inclination is to be specific and to have like a specific story. You need the character, the plot, that part. But the horror is much larger than that and exceeds that.
But yeah, so that's interesting. So you're saying that, or the Wikipedia thing that you're citing is saying that that the women's deaths account for about 18% of overall homicide
in Juarez. Yeah.
In Juarez. So that's really interesting. And I think it's sort of like I was looking at something that I think we'll definitely want to talk about. And it was Semiotext that published this book by Sergio Rodriguez or Sergio Gonzalez Rodriguez or Rodriguez Gonzalez. I'll have to look. But anyway, by Sergio, who becomes a character in this book and who Bolaño met and spent time with and really used his book Bones in the Desert, Huesos en el Desierto, as the model for the part about the crimes. But he wrote another text and what he talked about was the fact that when we talk about femicide, we're talking about not just the murder. We're not just talking about victims that are murdered and are women. We're talking about people that are murdered because they are women.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like what you're saying about, sort of like the expansion and the spreading of the horror and the violence, that it's not just these particular instances, these particular crimes. But it's a little bit like saying, for me, it's a little bit like saying, all lives matter.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't want to say that. I want to just say that the sheer horror of it is.
Yes. No, I know. I'm
so
not accusing you of that. But what I want to point out is that I think, like, in Bolaño could have talked about, we could talk about just the abject violence and the deaths, especially, cartel related deaths. But he chooses, and we're choosing, like, the femicide has a particular horror because of its senselessness, but also its design. Like, there's an element of it that seems like you can understand, it's comprehensible, right? Like murder between cartels. But it's not comprehensible that these women, these bodies are appearing in the desert. That's incomprehensible. And yet it feels like there's some sort of design.
Yeah. The other thing that to relate to that, and to sort of not defend myself, but to put a point on this, is that I also think that there's an inclination among Americans to be like, well, that's Juarez, that's Mexico, that's somewhere else. Whereas meanwhile, in Houston, there's a higher percentage of women being murdered in Houston than there is in Juarez. It's here. It's not somewhere else. Femicide doesn't exist there, and that's like their problem.
And they don't even have statistics and data for what happens on reservations, for instance.
I know that's coming up a lot. And like the women that get killed and murdered on reservations it's extraordinarily high and with zero consequences. And it doesn't get talked about in the same way. And I think there's an impulse among American liberal media to look at it as it's somewhere else. That's the part that, like, when I read that and saw that it was so much broader than that, and that the numbers are just as bad here, is like, yeah, you can't. The femicide's happening all around us.
Yeah,
it's not. And there's kind of that thing that goes on here of like, is it a serial killer? Where they're always like, well, this one guy we're going to see the one. He goes with the journalist to go see the one person that's in jail. They're like, well, this person, was caught. And it's like, but there's been more murders. And like, yeah, I don't know. Right. Like this idea of like finding one answer to it rather than it being like a whole.
It's set up very briefly with the quick mention of Jack the Ripper.
Rochester native.
Is that what makes Jack the Ripper so infamous throughout time? Is that his victims were women?
Yeah.
And that makes it all the more terrifying, right?
He only killed like 6 or 8 people.
Yeah, but it's the mutilation, the dissection.
That's the bad joke.
I know.
The bad joke.
I think that the key to all of this as well, and including, the references and the parallels to Indigenous women in both the U.S. and in Canada, is that this idea of like people being outside of society. So looking at like, these are marginal people in terms of like the system. And so these crimes, they just simply are not understood. They do not capture the imagination in the same way, is what Kessler is arguing. And he goes on to say, like, they say, well, what is your opinion about what's going on in Santa Teresa? I won't tell anybody. My lips are sealed. And he said, okay, this is on 267. I'll tell you 3 things I'm sure of. A, everyone living, okay, and this is to your point, Chad, everyone living in that city is outside of society. And everyone, I mean everyone, is like the ancient Christians in the Roman circus. This is the second reference in this part to the Roman circus, by the way. B, the crimes have different signatures. Okay, so we're talking not just about a serial killer. And C, the city seems to be booming. It seems to be moving ahead in some ineffable way. But the best thing would be for every last one of the people there to head out into the desert some night and cross the border. It's really chilling.
Yeah, that was the one that was one of the parts where I was just like, ooh, I need to put this down.
But that's interesting too. I hear about this thing about the ineffable. Like, so we're up against, at least for Kessler, this figure who we don't know exactly who he is, but we know he's like caught kind of killers in the past. He's some sort of detective, right?
Yeah.
But the idea that, like, that there's things that are either legible or illegible. There's things that can be understood or not understood. There are things that are, you know, the effable, the ineffable. So we're up again against this sort of like philosophical play of what can be understood and what is outside of our understanding or being able to be even spoken or
written. Be represented.
What is outside of the verbal? What is outside of the word? And I think that Bolaño to some degree is grappling with that. And for me, this is connected to when he talks about that something that writers are struggling against, like in the big works of literature, these torrential, imperfect works of literature. There's this grappling with that thing. In Spanish, it's aquello. And here, what is it? Is it the ineffable? Is it the illegible? You know, like what are we fighting against here? What are we grappling with that ultimately we're not going to be successful putting into words? It's so
the cool. fact that everything is hopeless and we will die an entropic death.
I don't think that is what it is, though. I think it's some sort of bit of reality that eludes us.
I know for me, like this is my virgin passage into this book. I've only read up to what we've read. I'm trying my best to stay away from scholarship because I don't want to spoil anything, right?
Yeah.
But what I'm noticing so far with what I've noticed in reading as far as we've gone to is you have this center point. Let's take our little lake, the poor Bobby on the lake. There's a plane crash, a fiery plane crash in the middle of this black lake, and it's horror and it's death. And he, for whatever reason, I'm clinging on to my hopeless life, but I want to get to that spot. And every single person we've come across to, there's this gravity in Santa Teresa that's combining them all, and they're all converging into this horror in a different kind of way, and from different places, and for different reasons. And
totally.
That's what I've noticed so far especially with Fate. Like it really is like stitching these things really tight together. And it's the same question it's kind of the same questions for each one of these people for different reasons, like converging to this place, into this horror.
Yeah, what am I doing here?
There are ways in which each one of the people that we've encountered are writers, and they are sort of different, even though the first two are academics. We have our academic critics that are referred to as critics, not as necessarily, they're academics, but it is the part about the critics specifically. And they're writing about their criticism about Arcimboldi as if that's going to get them to this great knowledge of Arcimboldi and of life and everything else. And then you have Amalfitano, whose writing is philosophical. He's a philosopher. He thinks about philosophy and the diagrams and like how that can explain something. And now you have Fate, who's like a journalist. Can a journalist profile? And he's just profiling. And he's profiling people that like both the seamen, the Black Panther canon, but then his other one that he references are like the people that have like the little Muslim brotherhood of like 10 to 15
the Mohammedan brothers.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, exactly. And then he wants to write about the crimes and is denied.
Yeah.
And even Arcimboldi, like, why is he there? And he's a writer.
Yeah. And he's a writer.
Exactly. Yeah. That's really interesting.
But there's a terrible gravity, and then like there's this duality of like flame, and then like just the sinking blackness beneath it. It is an absolute horrific landscape that we're swirling into.
You know, it's interesting, Brian, too, because it's like there is, with each part, there's a shift in the way that the people are approaching Santa Teresa also. So like the critics, it's this cerebral exercise. Their intention is to like grasp something, like I think about like trying to build meaning, right? Or trying to understand.
Well, it's almost like Carmen Sandiego. Like, oh, we're gonna gallivant around and find out. And
exactly.
We've got a clue and it leads over here. Let's go. Like,
and we're gonna lead Arcamboli by the hand to like collect the Nobel. Like they're like their attention is focused outward.
Yeah.
And then, but still in a really sort of like cerebral way. And then Amalfitano, it's like this internal like bewilderment, dazed state, like in front of the world, trying to figure out like what can I learn from hanging this geometry book up in the elements? What connections can I make? What meaning can I make through these random diagrams where
he's kind of just dropped into the
he's dropped in there and he's like trying to make sense of it. And then Fate is like the first person that we have where he just feels so much more like physical and like muscular in that way. And we start to see like other instances of like violence happening, and it's getting closer and closer to the main characters, and it's getting less sort of like random and like, I don't know, like spooky and more mundane. I mean, even the fact that like we're talking about the fighting and about the boxing and the, you know, the naked torsos of the young men out at the ranch, you know, where they're training, and then, you know, they're in the bar with the two young women and he ends up like making out with one. We don't really know what's going on there, but we're starting to get like more and more into like the body. Whereas with the critics, it was like anything to do with sex was this, we didn't know anything about what sex was really like in this kind of like hot academic menage a trois thing that was going on. But that was all like this weird, lofty sort of mythical language. And now we're getting down to like, he's kissing this girl, the dark-haired girl at the bar. You know, they're drinking, they're getting hammered. Like, people are, there's, you know, punches and again, like, you know, I don't know. I feel like we're moving towards like this more like muscular type of narration. And also we're getting closer and closer to the body.
Yeah. Boxing is a good stand-in for that in terms of like, I don't like boxing. I don't care about boxing. I don't know anything about boxing, but there is like that sort of romanticized vision of it being like a violent ballet of sorts, where the rules are defined. You're in a square. There's two people. There are like certain like codes that happen, and that violence is acceptable. Not just acceptable, but there are tons of sports writers there to write about that violence. The violence that of the femicides is outside of that and not writable. This goes back to what you're saying about what's legible and what's not. You can do that. When you're talking about the body too, one of the other sections that stood out was the part about whitening the races.
Oh, yeah.
Bluntly, of like, it's not just the body in this case, but genetic material and of like skin tone. This is on 287, where they go down through the Mexican upper classes is changing. They're getting richer and they're going looking for wives north of the border. That's what you call improving the race. Whoops, sorry, lost the page. A short Mexican sends his short son. Oh, because they're talking about why he's like, they need a tall boxer. And Mexicans are too short to be boxers. So a short Mexican sends his short son to college in California. The kid has money and does whatever he wants, and that impresses some girls. There's no place on earth with more dumb girls per square foot than a college in California. I would argue that Florida State could take that.
All right, let's, you know.
Not bash Florida.
This seems very misogynistic.
Florida State? Oh, Florida.
Florida State, no, dumb girls.
That part is, bottom line, kid gets himself a degree and a wife who moves to Mexico with him. So then the short Mexican grandkids aren't so short anymore. They're medium. And meanwhile, their skin's getting lighter too. These grandkids, when the time comes, set off on the same journey of initiation as their father. American college, American wife, taller and taller kids. What this means is that the Mexican upper class, of its own accord, is doing what the Spaniards who are hot-blooded and didn't think too far ahead, mixed with the Indian women, raped them, forced them to practice their religion, and thought that meant that they were turning the country white. Those Spaniards believed in a mongrel whiteness, but they overestimated their semen, and that was their mistake. You just can't rape that many people. It's mathematically impossible. It's too hard on the body. You get tired. This is like, that was a really fucked up scene. Also, Florida State is filled with dumb people, male and female. Like, Florida State's dumb. There's no misogyny there. It's just a place of dumb.
How dare you besmirch the Harvard of the South?
Yeah. What was that song we used to listen to?
Oh dear. Pop the fuck off, I think.
Yeah, pop the fuck off.
Just this white party in Florida it's a super spreader event. This is pre-pandemic, but oh god.
Oh my god.
Yeah, like obviously there's truth to it, but it's the satire here. Great dark sense of humor if you're into that, but just brutal, absolutely brutal.
It is, and it's interesting, like that. Fate has this reaction. He's like, "What are you doing? Are you flacking for the Klan?" Like he directly sees this reporter talking about, like, the Spaniards in the New World, and he can draw that line to his experience as an African American. And I think that's interesting too. Fate's own interpretation of his identity. And it's interesting that Bolaño, I mean, I think, this was written in the early 2000s. It's interesting to think about the problematics now, how this would be received now as like a white European, well, he's Chilean, but writing in a European tradition in Spain about an African American experience. I don't know if that would be problematized today in a way that it wasn't maybe in 2005 or whenever this came out in English a little bit later.
I think that's possible. The one section that I think alludes that, I don't know, maybe someone would object to it, is on page 283, is what I thought of when you were talking about that, where he goes to the gas station or whatever and gets a beer and a hot dog, and he's waiting, and she had said, the woman at first said something in Spanish, and he says, "I don't understand, I'm American." And then he says, you remembered what he said to the cashier, "I'm American. Why didn't I say I was African American? Because I'm in a foreign country? But can I really consider myself to be in a foreign country when I could go walking back to my own country right now if I wanted? And it wouldn't even take very long. Does this mean that in some places I'm American, and in some places I'm African American, and in other places, by logical extension, I'm nobody?"
Yeah. That's pretty poignant. I think, I think.
And you're still in America when you're in Mexico, because
you're still an American.
Right.
Exactly.
The other thing related to what you talked about before, Katie, and this is maybe foreshadowing of, I don't think it's really foreshadowing, but you've mentioned this before, and it is a point that will come up when we get to the next section, is on page 286, where he says, "The fucking killings are like a strike, amigo, a brutal fucking strike. The comparison of the killings to a strike was odd, but Fate nodded his head and didn't say anything. This is a real big city. We have everything factories, maquiladoras, one of the lowest unemployment rates, a cocaine cartel, blah, 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 blah." And it is referenced both in real life and in the book that a lot of the women who are murdered are coming from all over to work in those. They're workers.
They're workers.
They're workers, and they are being murdered. So that I just wanted to flag, because you, I think on the podcast, it may have been separate, but that before, and that I thought was interesting. We have one last part that we really should touch on, even though I think we get into it more next week, is that he meets Guadalupe Roncal, who is a reporter. This can't be the same reporter that's referenced in the first section. Is it? I don't know if it is or not.
No, because wasn't the one that Maureen's interested in? Was she an Italian reporter who went? Because Guadalupe Roncal is from.
It was an Italian reporter. You're right.
Yeah, so different.
I just found it. Yep. Okay, but
a different lady journalist.
A different journalist who happens to be named Guadalupe Roncal and happens to be a lady. But she's there to write about the crimes and is fucking terrified. And is staying at that hotel where all the sports writers are because it's safe than other places. And then is sort of afraid they're going to leave. All the sports, after the fight, they're all going to go. And then things are bad again. And there's a really disturbing part related to what you say about the misogyny and about Lady Reporter is do you know why I came and wrote about this? Because I'm a woman and women can't turn down assignments.
Yeah.
Very specifically that. Whereas Fate's like trying to write about it and they won't let him. You have the opposite situation where it's like, yeah, why don't you go write about all these women being murdered and go interview like someone who they believe is one of the murderers of some of those people because you're a woman and you have to do it. It's like very fucked up. The whole power structures here are clearly the way they are in real life, which is fucked up.
But and she is shit scared.
Yes.
She is shit scared. And on my page 299, I marked this place, which was like, there's a few different really spooky descriptions in this part. And I want to point back to one thing at the beginning after, but right here where she says she's going to go to the prison, right? She's going to go to the prison to interview someone who's been caught and is in serving time for the murders. Which continue. And she said, so she invites Fate to go with her. And she says, but I'm scared and I need company. This morning I drove past the Santa Teresa prison and I almost had a panic attack. Is it that bad? It's like a dream, said Guadalupe Roncal. It looks like something alive. Alive? I don't know how to explain it. More alive than an apartment building, for example. Much more alive. Don't be shocked by what I'm about to say, but it looks like a woman who's been hacked to pieces, but is still alive. And the prisoners are living inside the woman. I understand, says Pete. It's like
her response to it is, no, I don't think you do, but it doesn't matter. That's I have that underlying too. That's the one I was leading to of like, that's the part that's like so spooky too. Those, some of the images in here, it's kind of, relates to something else I'm reading, but I don't want to get into. But when they hit, like it's so powerful because of everything that's been kind of around that you've been primed for, and then you get that image of a woman's body hacked to pieces that's still alive with the prisoners living inside of it, and that's like the body. You're on top of the void, looking into the horror.
But this is also Santa Teresa. Okay, so we have to remember too that like the city was Ciudad Juarez, and it was on purpose, it's been given the name of a female saint, one who is, really important in the Spanish-speaking world and from Spain, Santa Teresa de Avila, who was a mystic and who like communed with God in this very sort of like unmediated and rapturous and physical way. So when she says like, when I read this, I think like Santa Teresa, like the female city, the female territory, the land, the desert, it's been hacked to pieces. It's still alive, but it is like ripped apart and there are people living in it. Like to me, it's like that could be the prison, but that could be Santa Teresa, the city.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Like it's that same sort of image for me of like, yeah, it's just kind of coming to me now. I wanted to bring up one more quick thing. I know we have to wrap up, but we could just talk forever. I mean, people could stop listening if they didn't want to listen anymore. But I wanted to ask, when we talked about the apocalypse in one of the earlier episodes, Fate is, as he's arriving to Mexico, Fate sees a horse. He sees a black horse. This is on, and I wanted to ask, see if Brian had any thoughts, actually.
Horse of the Apocalypse?
A horse of the Apocalypse. I want to know about the horses of the Apocalypse because he sees, hold on, guys, sorry. Let me find it. I had it here.
Isn't it 270? Yeah,
270, exactly. So basically, here's another crazy image that I wanted to put up. Again, about the buildings, about a physical space being a site of really like uncanniness, right? The uncanny. So he says that he's driving for 2 hours along the dark roads. He passed places where there were houses and restaurants and yards with white flowers and crookedly parked cars, but there were no lights on in the houses, as if the inhabitants had died that very night. And a breath of blood still lingered in the air. It's like, they're just houses with the lights off.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on that we have to assign this particular, sense to them? All right, so then he gets lost. He's tempted to turn back, but he keeps driving. On his way out of Patagonia, he saw a horse. When the headlights swept over it, the horse lifted its head and looked at him. Fate stopped the car and waited. The horse was black, and after a moment it moved and vanished into the dark. Just an interesting detail to include. And again, like if we're doing our dissertations and looking for all kinds of symbols.
One more dissertation one that kind of reflects that too is the tattoo on the boxer or the trainer, the tattoo. And then on page 300, for a second, Fate imagined Campbell on his knees in the corner of a dark room, clutching a Bible and weeping, which is sort of a reflection of that tattoo. And you can tie that back into the religiosity of everything as well.
Interesting. The other thing too that I want to point out, I don't know if you guys noticed this, but when Runcal, this is at the very end of this section that we read, when Runcal is talking about the suspect that's in prison, she says, this is on page 300, among my poor predecessor's papers, there were several photographs, a few of the suspect, 3 to be precise, all 3 taken in prison. In 2 of them, the gringo, sorry, I didn't mean that to be offensive, is sitting and looking at the camera, probably in a visitor's room. He has very blonde hair and very blue eyes. Eyes so blue, he looks blind. In the 3rd picture, he's standing up, looking to the side. He's hugely tall and thin, very thin, but not feeble looking at all. Like, who does this make anybody think of?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Weird.
Very weird.
Doesn't sound like one of the short, Mexican. What we're saying, what he was one of the funniest parts when he says, in all the pictures of the Mexican president with the American president, he only comes up to like the American president's nipples or something.
Yeah.
They just keep like inching taller and taller. But again, like interestingly, the groundwork has already been laid for this sort of like, I don't know, like the highlighting of the physicality and what we're meant to expect or not based on what someone looks like. So this killer with the blue eyes and the blonde hair, the very tall person.
Very interesting. I have 2 lines of the week. One that I think is important and one that I just had to read this month. The first one is, metaphors are a way of losing ourselves in semblances or treading water in a sea of seeming.
Yes, I underlined that too.
I love that line. But my other quote of the week is this. He saw part of a trashy show on which a hugely fat woman in her early 40s had to sit and listen to her husband, a hugely fat man in his mid 30s, and her husband's new girlfriend, a slightly less fat woman in her early 30s, insult her. The man he thought was clearly a faggot. The show was shot in Florida. Everyone was in short sleeves except for the host, who was wearing a white blazer, khaki pants, a gray-green shirt, and an ivory tie. At moments, the host looked uncomfortable. I just love that, shot in Florida was the part that I had to
you had to go back to that.
I had to go back. Had to take my last pot shot at Florida and the Jerry Springer-esque show that he watches. But that scene was really weird because he does watch it. He's like, that is describing like a normal Jerry Springer episode. And it is super disturbing that is codified and on television and broadcast, this sort of like weird violence and attention to the bodies that he pays there. And the way that they like, attention to the body of like they're circling her, she stands up and leaves. Like the whole thing is very uncomfortable, but yet it is supposed to be entertainment. And supposed to be something that we kind of laugh at.
Right.
Well, what's boxing? It's the entertainment of 2 people beating the shit out of each other.
Yep.
Brian?
I'll pick this one just because with how heavy everything is, I really do enjoy the way Chef Bolaño keeps things light and refreshing with his humor. So on page 232 at the bottom, the girl gave him a piece of paper where someone had written the phone number of a neighborhood funeral home. They'll take care of everything, she said gravely. Well, the guy's got a sense of humor, obviously.
But maybe that's Natasha Wimmer.
No.
I did want to say, Chad, your line, that the sea of seeming, we just have to point out that like Bolaño like laid the groundwork for that line coming to existence, but I think that's got to be such a beautiful translation. That's like all Natasha, a sea of seeming. It's really cool. Okay, I'm going to read one that I found this really kind of, I think it's very interesting. I think we could talk about, I think it connects what we've talked about a little bit, but it's also really funny. So this is when Barry Seaman is in part of his sermon, and this is part of his sermon on usefulness. And he says, this is at the end of that section, and he says, he's talking about reading in prison. I was doing something useful no matter how you look at it. Reading is like thinking, like praying, like talking to a friend, like expressing your ideas, like listening to other people's ideas, like listening to music. Oh, yes. Like looking at the view, like taking a walk on the beach. And you, who are so kind, now you must be asking, what did you read, Barry? I read everything. But I especially remember a certain book I read at one of the most desperate moments of my life, and it brought me peace again. What book do I mean? What book do I mean? Well, it was a book called An Abridged Digest of the Complete Works of Voltaire.
I was really hoping
I love that too. I have that marked in mine.
I promise you that is one useful book, or at least it was of great use to me.
I wanted the Ribs book. I was hoping, what book was that? Ribs. I wrote this book actually. It's on sale in the back.
There's one part of his usefulness speech that's very Rodrigo Frazan, where he's like, he said that a man couldn't live on healthy food alone. You have to read books, he said, not watch so much TV. The experts say TV doesn't hurt your eyes. I'm not so sure. It won't do your eyes any good, and cell phones are still a mystery.
I mean,
the recipe for Brussels sprouts.
Yeah,
it's so good. I wish we had more time to talk about this speech/sermon.
I had initially named our episode after that sermon because of the provocativeness of like danger, money, food,
stars,
usefulness.
Yeah.
I read something. I should find it because actually it was. What was it? I can cite them next week, but there was a really great sort of like read along recap of this section, and they mentioned something about like parallels between Seaman's speech/sermon, because it is being given in a church, even though he's like a layperson, and a sermon from Moby Dick.
Oh, interesting.
Maple. I don't know if that's
I believe that one was on Jonah, if I recall. I haven't read that in a long time.
I know.
The book of Jonah.
I'll pull it up here. We can always revisit that next week as well. Like we don't have to like adhere to 301 through the end. We can pull this back.
Okay. We might want to.
Melville, what a hack.
Moby Dick, Father Mapple's sermon.
Yeah, I've got it open here. It's coming.
So that might be interesting. That might be interesting, and we could look at it because also again with the comparisons to like Moby Dick being referenced as one of like the the torrential works of literature. Yeah, that could be interesting. But I thought that is a really.
I saw the opening maw of hell with endless pains and sorrows there, which none but they that feel can tell. Oh, I was plunging to despair.
Ooh, the maw.
I can't read this fast. Yeah, we can definitely come back to that and definitely like look at that and his sermon, quote unquote sermon. Very fun.
So this has been long, and we've gone over a little bit, and there's more for the people that are listening. You have to stay tuned for the interview with Natasha Wimmer, the translator of this book and many other Bolaño texts. She has incredible insight and is a translation genius. So please listen.
Absolutely. Stay tuned. And as always, go rate, review us, do fun things, tell your friends. I'll see you guys in the maw next week, I suppose.
Okay.